flows from Nigeria amount to about 10 billion and above annually, which is almost the budget of the federal government of Nigeria. So I cannot tell you that that is one specific figure that one could leverage on, but the general understanding is that illicit financial flow drains a lot of resources out of Nigeria. The second aspect of your question is the impact, and that is the biggest issue. Again, the impact, people believe, is not something you can see, but you can feel. First, illicit financial flows denies a country of revenues. And if the revenues of a country are denied, it means the country will not be able to fulfill its governance obligations, providing social services, providing security, education, and social welfare. In addition to that, it affects the foreign exchange market in the country. It undermines the credibility of the currency and market intermediation of the country. Furthermore, it undermines credible rule of law institutions because it contributes more to the problem of corruption. Right. Corruption facilitates illicit financial flows. At the same time, illicit financial flows reinforces corruption because of the way and manner people have to look for ways and means by which they will conceal the proceeds of corruption. It also undermines the integrity and credibility of a country in the international community because it affects the image of the country, and therefore it has a possibility of scaring foreign investors because they will not have confidence in the economy, and if there is no confidence in the economy, then it's not good for anybody. Now, domestically, because illicit financial flows also happen domestically, it affects the various institutions of government. For example, just last week, Nigeria made significant progress by securing the forfeiture of many assets from the former Minister of Justice as well as the former Governor of Central Bank of Nigeria. That shows you the extent of the problem in the country and how it affects our institutions. So people will perceive Nigeria as a country that
it's corrupt.
Is not good for business. I don't know whether I should describe it as that, but I know it's not good for business.
Right.
Therefore, our own role is to support government, and we call on the civil society as well to support government initiative. The aspect of security, which is the last aspect of your question, indeed, it affects it because, one, terrorism generates things for maybe proceeds for illicit financial flows. For example, if you take kidnapping, the kidnappers demand for ransom and they accumulate a lot of money, and therefore there is element of illicit financial flows. At the same time, the illicit financial flows also help in increasing the rate of insecurity because when kidnappers accumulate a lot of money, they go to do what? To buy arms. They go to sponsor other forms of criminality. So in general, therefore, there is a direct relationship between transnational organized crime and illicit financial flows. And that is where the impact on security is very, very obvious.
Right. You've mentioned a whole lot of issues here, especially in that question that my colleague asked you. So when we look at the great work that, of course, anti-corruption agencies are doing in Nigeria, talking about the EFCC, the ICPC, and, of course, security agencies, and the level of issues we still have surrounding illicit financial flows, where then do we marry the great work that these institutions are doing, and how much it seems that those who are involved in this flows are still able to circumvent the system and still able to carry out these activities?
Okay, well, you see, to be honest with you, even though the problem is huge in Nigeria, Nigeria is perhaps the leading country in dealing with this problem at the same time. Because Nigeria has put in place a lot of machinery, including adequate legislative framework. There is sufficient laws for the combating of illicit financial flows. Nigeria also has very comprehensive institutions, the EFCC, the
ICPC,
Nigerian Financial Intelligence
NFIU.
Unit, NFIU, the ICPC, the Code of Conduct Bureau, and several other institutions are working towards combating illicit financial flows. They are also doing a lot in order to coordinate the national efforts to deal with. The problem, however, is that big as the problem is and as many as the solutions are, is like the problem is still daunting. Daunting in the sense that illicit financial flows remain a very big, huge problem for Nigeria for a number of reasons.
Okay.
One, Nigeria's economy is perhaps the third largest in Africa. Nigeria is naturally endowed with natural resources. Which are the first sources
right,
for illicit financial flows, and therefore you could see that the problem is unending. Take, for example, the oil and gas industry. Just yesterday, the former MD of Wari Refinery was charged to court for offenses related to illicit financial flows. And last week, the MD of Port Harcourt Refinery. These are just a few among many that happened. The issue of fuel subsidy that this administration stopped was one major aspect of illicit financial flow that was affecting Nigeria. If you look at the area of mining, illicit mining particularly generates a lot of illicit financial flows. Now, in many parts of the mineral producing states in Nigeria, you find communities complaining about the prevalence of illegal mining and the involvement of foreigners in this and the way and manner they conduct it. And this is where, again, you find a direct relationship between illegal mining and insecurity in Nigeria. Therefore, Nigeria must be concerned about this. Nigeria is also concerned because Nigeria needs to retain its credibility with the international financial system, and therefore dealing with illicit financial flows will give some credibility to the efforts that Nigeria is doing. So collectively, the civil society, everybody, the media, should support this initiative, to support Nigeria to prevent this cankerworm, because it is in the interest of Nigeria to generate resources, not only tax administration, but also through blocking other loopholes and leakages that generate illicit financial flows. So what should Nigeria do? Nigeria should look at the aspects of improving its beneficial ownership registry. Determining who owns a company is very, very critical. Improving the procurement process is also very critical, because a lot of the initial illicit financial flows come from manipulation of procurement contract, especially in the public service. So we need to also strengthen the aspects of investigation, the aspect of prosecution, and having a credible record that will serve as deterrence to potential offenders in this area.
Sorry, Jibola, before you wrap up that aspect of your submission, let's also look at the role of the banks or the financial institutions, because they also play a huge role when it comes to bridging the gap between this illicit financial flow. So for the banks, what are some of the things that you think that the country also needs to take a closer look at when it comes to the role of financial institutions?
Indeed, the financial institutions are at the front line of combating illicit financial flows, because they are the first intermediary for illicit financial flows. When you generate money, you have to find a way of getting this money into the banks, because you cannot keep the huge amount of money in your house. Therefore, under the SECFIN project, the financial sector is a targeted sector determined by the NFIU.
Okay.
You know, the financial institutions have obligation to render a report, suspicious transaction reports, to the Financial Intelligence Unit, and therefore to strengthen their capacity to comply with acceptable international standards. This project aims to support them through capacity building and other means to strengthen their capacity to adequately render suspicious transactions reports. They must enforce the know your customer rules in all they do with their customers, because you need to know the background of people who bring in money into your financial institution. They need to put in place internal mechanisms for improving their institutional governance. Accountability systems must be in place to ensure that their institutions are credible enough to be reckoned with in terms of doing international business. Therefore, I can assure you that financial institutions are at the front, in the front burner of dealing with this problem. Not only them, the designated non-financial institutions, businesses, and professions, like lawyers, like Association of Accountants, like several other non-designated financial institutions, they also have obligation, because in some cases, illicit financial flows are concealed by professional organizations, estate managers, lawyers, accountants, etc., etc. So they must be brought into the fold of national efforts and the necessary framework to combat illicit financial flows.
Right. Okay, my question is a follow-up to Abimbola's own. Even though there is an anti-money laundering law in the country, we still find some of these financial institutions being culpable. Sometimes they cover their customers, and of course, some of their transactions are not transparent. Do you think the laws are strong enough to checkmate individuals and some of these financial institutions?
The purpose of a law in society is to prevent, and the other purpose is to serve as a deterrence when it is properly enforced. For the fact that you have a law in a country does not mean that there will be no crime. There will certainly be crime, but the essence is to prevent it. If you are not able to prevent it, then you enforce the law. As I stated earlier, Nigeria has a very comprehensive legal framework for combating money laundering especially. And you know the challenge here is that Nigeria is a huge country. The financial system in Nigeria is one of the largest in Africa, and therefore there are several challenges. And as you face one problem from this angle, another problem is arising from this. But overall, if you look at the mutual evaluation of Nigeria, where the anti-money laundering framework has been assessed, Nigeria has performed very well, and there is room for improvement. And this significant performance was recognized by the Financial Action Task Force, the global standard setting body that subjected Nigeria to what it called the grey list. After a lot of work, Nigeria improved its legal and operational frameworks, and Nigeria was removed from this grey list in October last year, which gives Nigeria a lot of credibility. Many other African countries are coming to learn from Nigeria. The FIU of Nigeria is receiving delegations virtually every month from other countries, and SECFIN is doing very well here, because SECFIN is sponsoring a lot of countries from Eastern and Southern Africa. Even last week, there was a delegation from Eastern and Southern Africa that came with the support of the SECFIN project to study Nigeria's regulation of the non-profit sector. And this is really trying to find African solutions to African problems, and this is highly commendable.
Okay, tracking for me is another major problem. Even when we have some of these illicit funds being moved, tracking them is always difficult. Why is that so?
Well, it is difficult but not impossible, because a lot of the assets have been tracked. If those assets were not tracked, you cannot imagine that over 52 assets of former Attorney General were identified, and the sources of funding were also identified. So the same thing with over 72 houses owned by the former governor of Central Bank that were forfeited to government. So tracking has been difficult but not impossible. A lot is being done by the enforcement agencies to identify these assets. And the FIU is also doing a lot through the analysis of suspicious transactions report to support law enforcement agencies with evidence of illicit financial flows and how to follow the money trail and get the money and get the resources and confiscate those they can confiscate. And they are making efforts also to make sure that offenders are actually prosecuted and convicted if found guilty.
Well, looking again at the SECFIN project, of course, it's in the second year from 2024. This is the second year.
Yes.
And of course, it's a 4-year project in Nigeria. You've talked about the fact that on the continent, Nigeria and Benin Republic are actually the ones receiving the full funding for this project. And you also submitted that a lot of African countries are also coming daily into Nigeria to learn from the Nigerian experience. Where, under the same project, where also is Nigeria learning from their success story when it comes to successful fighting or of illicit funding, and how has technology also helped here in making the job a lot easier? Jibola asked about tracking. You did say that it might be difficult but not impossible, because we've also recorded a lot of positives from in that aspect. So if you took a look at what this project has done so far and what this project still has to offer in its entirety, how are we doing? Our learning process, is it also improving by the day?
Well, first of all, Nigeria has learned from itself. Okay. When it was put under the FATF grey list, it identified the main reasons why it was included on that list. And all agencies work under the umbrella of the Interministerial Committee on Anti-Money Laundering. Now, the Special Unit Against Money Laundering, SCUMUL, which is a department under the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, did tremendous job, especially in understanding the FATF standards with respect to non-profit organizations, and it engaged constructively with the NPOs in Nigeria, and with the support of other agencies. Nigeria is the first country to be upgraded from a rating of partial compliance to fully compliance on that recommendation 8 of the FATF. This is one major learning point for almost all countries in Africa. Okay. Of course, the SECFIN program contains components for other countries to learn from Nigeria. It also contains aspects of Nigeria learning from other countries. First, Nigeria learned from itself, it learned from the FATF, and there are opportunities also for Nigeria to learn from other countries. In terms of exchange program, there are provisions under the project for Nigerian authorities, and some visited early this year to Senegal to exchange experience with other countries. Another program will soon be undertaken. Some Nigerian officials will be going to Cotonou also to interact with their colleagues in Benin Republic. Nigerian Financial Intelligence Unit also has a plan to undertake a study either to Canada or UK, whichever jurisdiction they choose, because they have to determine what are we going to learn from a country before we go to such a country. Mm-hmm. So in terms of peer learning, it's reciprocal. Some countries are learning from Nigeria. Nigeria is also learning from. Even from those countries are coming to learn from Nigeria. They are also sharing their experiences, because each country has its own unique experiences. Mm-hmm. And therefore, Nigeria could even benefit from countries that have not made progress, because when you learn from the mistakes of your brother, then you can improve yourself. And this is why the ML-CFT system in Nigeria is improving daily. But the most important thing that Nigeria has to do is to increase and improve on the political will to do certain things. And that was demonstrated last Friday when the president signed an executive order on virtual assets and virtual assets provision. This was a huge challenge because, as you know, Nigeria is rated as the 3rd country in the world for the use of virtual assets. So Nigeria has taken the right step at the right time, and the National Assembly is in the process of enacting a law that will strengthen this executive order. I believe if this process is completed before the end of the year, Nigeria's rating will be excellent.
All right, this will be a fine place to leave this conversation this morning. Thank you so much, Professor Abdullahi Shehu, SECFIN Africa Project Representative in Nigeria. We thank you for coming on the show and giving us your expertise on this topic. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bimbo, and thank you, Ayo.
Ajibola,
thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to your studio. Thank you.
All right, that's the much your take on this side of the table. We'll take a quick break. The conversation returns shortly.